Perhaps more than any other franchise in gaming history, music is an essential and foundational piece of The Legend of Zelda, and these soundtracks have become part of each game's identity. And today, I'm taking on the tall task of counting down the top 5 soundtracks in Zelda history. Before we get started on the top 5, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. It's free, it doesn't cost you a penny, and it lets me get content to you guys quicker and easier. Thank you so much, and now on to the top 5 soundtracks in Zelda history. Number 5. The Wind Waker. For a soundtrack to be effective, it has to evoke the spirit and location of a game. The Wind Waker's soundtrack is so good at accomplishing just this. This soundtrack leans heavily on lighter stringed instruments and, so appropriately, woodwinds. So many woodwinds. It gives the game an island life, sailboating, vacation kind of feel when it's called for. Life on the open sea needs to have that kind of light, airy musical accompaniment, and the Wind Waker's soundtrack does that so very well. Like many other games in the series, Link has to alter elements of the game by playing music himself. Here, the Wind Waker itself is a conductor's baton at Link's disposal, and it cooks up one heck of a soundtrack. Number 4. Breath of the Wild. This is the most unique soundtrack in the series, no doubt. I was unsure where to place it on this countdown. It's the only game on this list that doesn't explicitly require the player to perform any music. It's also by far the most minimalistic soundtrack to date. It's predominantly soft, classic piano, and some would think it's overly soft and plain, but to me, it fits the game so beautifully. Breath of the Wild wouldn't feel right with an overly orchestrated soundtrack. The simplicity brings out the exploratory nature of the game itself. Most of the game is discovering what's next, and that non-traditional, non-linear path through the game, which goes against the grain for a typical Zelda title, requires music that is not intrusive. Breath of the Wild isn't like Ocarina of Time, which has a specific track of music for a specific environment. For example, you'll hear this track in Lon Lon Ranch, this track in Kakariko Village, this track in the Fire Temple. The path through Breath of the Wild is so unique to each player that the soundtrack by necessity has to ebb and flow with the path that the player takes. And it's so brilliantly done, equal parts subtle and intense where necessary, that it's become one of the greatest soundtracks in Zelda history. Number 3. Twilight Princess. If you've watched any of my previous Zelda videos, you know how much love I have for this game. To me, it's the mature version of Ocarina of Time, and with a more mature game comes a more mature soundtrack. There are elements of sadness and despair in this game's music that you simply don't get in other Zelda titles. These tracks often evoke emptiness and desperation, most notably, perhaps, in the game's most famous song, Midna's Lament. And not all of Twilight Princess's music is dark. In Castletown, for example, the music is appropriately light and joyful. The game also takes classic Zelda ambient music and remixes and upgrades it. In-house music, Hyrule Field, and the Fairy Fountain menu music, to name a few. Twilight Princess puts a different twist on getting the player to play music as well. In this case, using Link in his wolf state to howl in place of an instrument that other Zelda games would traditionally use. Twilight Princess's soundtrack makes the game feel like the epic adventure that it is. And if it were recorded with a live orchestra, I'd most certainly have it higher on this list. Number 2. Skyward Sword. In so many ways, Skyward Sword's soundtrack was the one we'd always wanted, and the presentation we'd hoped we'd get with Twilight Princess. Skyward Sword boasted the first live orchestral soundtrack in Zelda history, and it sounded magnificent. It's a big part of the reason why I have it up so high on this list. It's moving, majestic, and it feels important. It pays homage to classic Zelda tracks in the past while creating its own identity. Again, with a huge part of its identity being that it's recorded by a live orchestra. The game's main theme, the Ballad of the Goddess, is a masterpiece by itself, but when listened to backwards, is the famous Zelda's Lullaby. It's a brilliant love letter to Zelda fans while creating an epic new theme for Skyward Sword. The live nature of this soundtrack enabled boss fights to have more gravitas, open worlds to feel more alive, and dungeons to feel more brooding. The entire game captured a more theatrical feel thanks to its musical score, and it's a huge reason why Skyward Sword is so enjoyable to play. As we look forward to Tears of the Kingdom, it's my personal hope that Nintendo finds a happy medium between Skyward Sword's and Breath of the Wild's soundtracks. Looking back, Skyward Sword was a major turning point in the growth and maturation of Zelda's musical scores. But even so, it's always going to be hard to top the game at number 1. Number 1. Ocarina of Time. There very simply is no other choice for number 1 on this countdown. Ocarina of Time has not only the best soundtrack in Zelda history, but in my opinion, it's the best soundtrack in gaming history. This game cemented music's integral role in Zelda games, and it's been as such ever since. The Ocarina of Time itself, an instrument, is the key item in and the title of this incredible game. There is no Legend of Zelda series without music, and this game is the reason why. Each track in Ocarina's soundtrack is memorable, and that's talking both about background music and melodies learned on the ocarina itself. Think of Zelda's Lullaby, the Song of Time, Epona's Song, and think of the music you hear in the Kokiri Forest, Kakariko Village, Hyrule Field, the Gerudo Valley, which, by the way, many people consider to be the best track in the game. Go back and listen to this soundtrack and tell me that each and every melody doesn't evoke some sort of emotion inside of you. You have to use your controller as a virtual ocarina and learn so many melodies during the course of this game. You're playing music yourself as a key element of this game's progression. Not only is every ocarina melody a representation of the locale in which they're learned, but they're also useful tools throughout the game to warp and move blocks and freeze enemies and unlock secrets. You simply cannot experience Ocarina of Time without becoming an apprentice musician. And so, no other Zelda game could possibly take this number 1 spot. Ocarina of Time is synonymous with music, and its soundtrack is as legendary as the epic tale itself. And there are the top 5 soundtracks in Zelda history. Hey, if you enjoyed the video or you agree or disagree with any of my choices, feel free to leave a comment below and let me know how you feel. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel as well. It's so important to keeping this thing up and running. I'm the Zap-Zap Man. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.